So, I don't think it's a controversial opinion to say that the Miraculous Fandom has some very strong opinions at times, and whether this is about the quality of the writing and the direction of the story, about the quality of the animation, the design of the world, the characters and their individual arcs and personalities, or even just the big dog himself, Thomas Asterisk, you'll find places like Reddit or X as a hotbed of discussion, angst, and more just outright rage and hatred. Look, I can hate with the best of them, trust me. Long-time watchers will know I enjoy a good rant as much as the next fella. But I have noticed in the last, year or so, we have seen this mentality start to really dominate the fandom as a whole, especially in the discourse that surrounds one of the show's most important characters. It's become more powerful than it's ever been before. And let's not beat around the bush too much. We're talking Marinette and the seeming burning hatred that I've seen to start to escalate within the fandom. And so today I want to sort of dive into that toxic wasteland and puzzle together why the hate's gotten so much more intense in the last year or so since the end of Season 5. And also just briefly give my thoughts on whether it's justified at all, or is it one of those overblown things that gets tossed into an echo chamber and becomes amplified by a huge degree. Guess we'll see. But yes, the hate. Time for a trip down memory lane. Now, over the last couple of years, and I'll admit it has been taking me a while, I've been watching back some of the older episodes of Miraculous Ladybug, namely Season 1 and now Season 2, and giving my thoughts on these older episodes that predate the channel, and me making videos on Miraculous regularly. And in those episodes, and from my memory of those days of the fandom, those early glory years, Marinette was very popular. Like, don't get me wrong, even then there was a massive pull towards Cat Noir from vocal online fans, but it was nothing compared to the disparity you see these days. In those early days, Marinette as a character was less cringe overall. She was still a goofball at times, but it was in a largely endearing way. She was not yet the creepy pillow sniffer that would come to know in later seasons of the show. And she was not presented in a way that made her come across as overly perfect or righteous compared to everybody else. She would regularly make mistakes, and these mistakes would have effects on the story of the episodes. She'd have to work through those mistakes to try to improve. Same with Adrian. Good times. On top of that, the dynamic between the heroes was still very strong, especially in those days before Cat Noir properly confesses his feelings to Ladybug, and it's just a nice flirtatious undercurrent. The story and the characters were more simplistic back in those days, but it worked, and was very compelling. And it rocketed the show into popularity and began the decade-long fandom that's still going strong today, and is now evolving more with films and a new saga to look forward to. But then we come to Seasons 3 and 4, and this is where we started to try get some more long-running storylines. Marinette training to become the next Guardian, Chloe and her rise and fall arc, bringing in Kagami and Luca and having them come to prominence as alternate ships, and with this came more screen time to be dedicated to these characters, and these stories. And in a lot of ways, this meant that Adrian, especially, was shuffled off to the side, whilst Marinette took the bulk of the remaining screen time so her character could continue to develop. And it was in this time that the big complaints of her being forced into prominence really started to come to the forefront. A common complaint from those days was, the creators seem to have forgotten that the show's titled Miraculous Tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir. And it certainly didn't help that by the end of Season 4, Cat Noir was regularly getting punked out by the villains. The pattern would be, Cat Noir appears, he simps for Ladybug hard and gets rejected and sooks, then he gets hammered by the villain so Ladybug looks stronger when she defeats them alone. And this happened a lot. And so this further developed resentment towards the character from a lot of the Cat Noir stans, and then they were further pissed off as Cat Noir's role as Ladybug's confidant and closest ally was usurped in Season 4 by Alia/Rena Rouge. And since then, it never really felt the same anymore. The vibe was that the show was simply Miraculous Ladybug, and Cat Noir was another face in the crowd, a generic member of the team. And that was going strong. On top of that, she became the Guardian, giving her a huge, important storyline. And in fact, isn't she also supposed to be the greatest wielder in living memory? Even unlocks new ways to use her Miraculous, and meanwhile Cat Noir's just there going, Cataclysm go brr. And so by the end of Season 4, there was a significant resentment from both an in-story perspective, disliking her for what she believed was her overt mistreatment of Cat Noir, but also from a meta perspective from a vocal portion of the audience, largely regarding her character being pushed as the lead, whilst Cat Noir was being increasingly sidelined. And on top of that, I don't think the Chloe storyline helped at all, because ultimately, in story, it's Marinette's character who made the call that Chloe shouldn't get a Miraculous again after her identity became known to Hawkmoth. And so, I think on some level, the Chloe stans are eternally pissed about that fact, especially given her hypocrisy, it is kind of hypocrisy, in allowing everybody else to use their Miraculouses even after it was revealed who they were to Hawkeye. And then there's the way she jumped through hoops and hoops just to keep Alia able to use tricks whenever she wanted. If you're a Chloe diehard, these were definitive bruh moments. And so I think they get rolled into the Marinette hate train too. She became heavily intertwined with one of the show's worst ever storylines. And for a lot of people, there's no washing off that stink no matter how hard you go. On top of that, her character, no two ways about it, became majorly Flanderized, right? I'm not sure when it happens, but it's a slow process. Originally in season 1, and the point I'm up to in season 2, her crush on Adrian and her awkwardness and clumsiness, it's kind of funny and cute. It's a very sweet thing. She hasn't ascended as the goddess of unhealthy relationship boundaries just yet. But then at some point, it just happens. And she's suddenly the classic stalker trope, a pillow-sniffing, statue-kissing weirdo. And I think the fact that the show continues after this to present her unhinged antics as rather funny and just normal, kind of, despite escalating to the point of being deeply creepy, soured a lot of people. And topped that off with the weird, over-exaggerated stuttering, falling over, and the clumsiness that would feature in her interactions with Adrian, when previously she'd simply just slightly stutter and blush, but could still interact with him. It quickly turned every single one of their interactions into a massive chore, which is a bad thing, as they're the show's main ship. If your audience is watching your lead character and cringing at everything they do, perhaps it's time to go back to the drawing board and try something else. No? Oh, you know best. Okay, sure. No problem, Thomas. Forgive me. And so, I think the root of her rise as the show's most controversial figure definitely lies somewhere in between all of this. All of these factors are playing into it. And honestly, I try to be fair when they deserve it. The writing did seem to take that shit on board during the course of season 5. At least I feel like it did. Felt like a lot of the criticisms were being addressed about her character. Marinette made some major mistakes at the end of season 4 and the beginning of season 5. The hero team was stripped back, and Cat Noir returned to a position of being far more prominent, like he hadn't been since season 3 was at its peak. The creepy stalker stuff finally started to fall away as we hit the endgame phase for Adrianette at long last, and that was all going swimmingly, until Asterix said, "Fuck them kids," and produced the finale. The finale, the end of the Agrest arc, where Marinette gives Adrian a kiss on the cheek and says, "I'll handle this one, baby," whilst Adrian stays home and cries. Legit. That is his role in the finale, to cry. Oh. And so suddenly all those old critiques of the show being too hyper-focused on Ladybug and never giving Cat Noir any sort of shine, they all came roaring back into focus. Because let's be real, unless they pull out one of the biggest twists of all time and use this to springboard into a lot of new storylines, and I'm going to press X to doubt on some of that, then they have gimped out this dude's character and made him into a total joke for some reason. Legit, this storyline, this ending, the battle next to Emily's corpse, it felt tailor-made for Adrian to at least be there, and then he isn't at all, really. Instead, Marinette gets all the hero moments, all the relevance, all the screen time. I mean, shit, the sidekick minor heroes had more of an impact on the finale than Adrian did. And so I think for a lot of fans, this was the final straw on trying to reconcile this difference. And the hate for Marinette, both the character but also what she represents in terms of writing quality, it increased exponentially. And on top of that, I think it's being amplified by the fact that we're in the midst of a big-ass off-season. Remember the big daddy of all breaks, season 3 to 4? Oof, that was a long, long break. A definitive fandom winter. November 13th, 2019 to March 23rd, 2021. And that's considered a very long break for the fandom, about 16 months. And also coming off the back of the Chloe Redemption flop. And credit where credit's due. In that break, we saw the fandom come somewhat unhinged about that. And so I think this break, which is currently like 14 months, because we ain't counting the recycling special, so in all likelihood, it's going to potentially be a longer break for season 5 to 6 than it was back in the day. So is it any wonder the fandom is starting to spiral with no new content, and thus is going back over and over the same ground and being steadily driven to insanity and rage? It's actually been such a massive weight. We need a special or something. Stat. Or a trailer. Do something, son. I feel like there used to historically, at least at the start of the break, be a bit of pushback on the hate train, you know what I mean? Historically, I think that for every hate post about Marinette, in equal measure, there would be discussion of her positive traits and pushback on the haters. But I feel like you see it so much less now. We've moved from a negative feedback loop into a positive feedback loop, where the hate posts just keep increasing in volume and the other takes are drying up. Any guesses as to why? I would say it's because I think people are starting to take it a bit too seriously. You get flamed in the comments these days for defending the writing and whatnot, like brutally. And so I think it's pretty obvious as to why her characters cop so much hate. And most of it, obviously is due to the quality of the writing, not just of her specifically, but how it impacts the writing of the story and other characters too. And it really is insane to see the trajectory of it all. And for me personally, I find it very disappointing. I'll be real, even back in the day, I always tried to be fair in my assessments of the character and whether she'd been written well. And I feel like they made so much good headway on the character over the course of season 5, only to fail right at the end. And in a flash, it invalidates and undoes everything they've done up to that point. So from that perspective, it's shit writing, and it's very deeply annoying because it feels like even when they take a lot of good positive steps, they immediately decide they need to backtrack or make the worst possible choices for the story and characters. And it leaves you sitting there thinking, what? This is how it ends? Nah, trash. But on the other hand, does anybody feel like the hate is getting to be a bit much at this point? Like, we're at the point that if you like the character, you're going to get flamed and hated on. And that is cringe. So, to me, whilst I get the perspective of why her character's online popularity on social media has tumbled significantly, I think some folks need to sit down, take a breather, because it's getting intense. There's no shame in hating the character, but hating on those who enjoy the character is getting weird. It's not like she's some awful, immoral character, and thus, if you genuinely like her, that's a dog whistle for you being a piece of shit. The reality is, she plays out like a bad OC from trash fan fiction. She's a character who gets all the best traits of everybody, with all her negative traits and moments swept under the rug, with the story pretending like she's always right when the audience is just sitting there shaking their head. I suspect that ain't changing, but we'll see. Maybe season 6 will be different. Regardless, let's be nice, shall we? And so yeah, not really much else to say beyond that. And so I'll just remind you, these have all been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of this whole Marinette hate debacle? Do you agree with the points I've made? Maybe you disagree and have something you want to add. I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.